currently only 8% of the world is circular. Without adopting these circular economy strategies, I'm just afraid we won't get there. But in order to be successful, I feel they need to be more embraced by the public.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to We Are Duffree's Perspectives.
We have a lot of responsibility. We reach thousands and millions of people through the projects that we're doing.
We are a creative agency maximizing the positive impact on businesses, society, and our planet.
So if you currently look at all communication marketing campaigns, it's not always representing society.
Radical change needs to happen now. Otherwise, brands and companies are going to get left behind.
If you're a marketing manager, if you're in a senior position, you're an opportunity maker. So how can you redistribute those opportunities in an interesting way?
Every week, founder Mitchell talks to visionaries and changemakers who are shaking up the status quo.
We create content for every living soul on this planet.
Get ready to be launched into a new perspective.
What is your biggest strength?
So my biggest strength is, I believe, my grit.
What is something you've always wanted to do?
I think one of the things I've always wanted to do is do like a real survival.
A systemic change or individual change?
Maybe this is the easy way out, but I think in order to achieve systemic change, you need individual change.
Yeah. What's a book tip or your favorite book?
So the last book I read was Donut Economics from Kate Raworth. And I think what I really liked about the book is that she was able to explain, quite a concept thing in very easy words and especially visuals. And this concept of the donut is so easy to explain and leaves out a lot of the complexity that I found that really unique.
Martijn, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Glad to be here.
It's an honor to have you as one of our guests. I've got a ton of questions for you. Like, you're a serial entrepreneur. That really inspires for being an entrepreneur myself. Can you give us a little introduction in who you are?
So after sort of studying physics and actually just being in the Netherlands for a couple of years, together with my then girlfriend, we moved to the US to go to business school, and that was during the late 90s. And as you may recall, in the dot-com boom that soon turned to be a bust, at my MBA at Harvard, there were a lot of entrepreneurial plans, and at that time we felt we sort of were the chosen ones. Internet was happening; it was all up to the new generation, and the traditional economy would go and would be replaced by a completely new one, led by the new leaders of the new millennium. I also joined one of those initiatives, and they raised 55 million on a stack of slides with a wild internet plan.
Wow, this was while you were studying at Harvard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there was in the the concept was a massively multiplayer game where, a million people would log in, say from LA, and the other sort of half from New York or other places in the US. And they would then compete head to head with each other on a specific time slot. And then the winner would get $1 million.
$1 million?
That was the basic concept. So we did it after school, of course. The business model didn't work out. And we did give away $1 million each week. So burn rate was, big and predictable. Yeah. And then we pivoted to look at another market that was quite big, but still very much one way. And it ended up being the TV market. So we moved the company to LA and basically started all over again. So that was sort of my first entrepreneurial experience. Wow. And that ended up, of course, it was a hard time, and, we had to build a company from the ground up, but it ended up being reasonable, successful. And then
coming up with a game already, that this was early days internet, of course.
Yeah, you have to remember, these were the days with the dial-up connections, right?
Yeah.
So with the,
with
when you dialed up, and you've got mail.
Yeah.
And then your sister would be screaming because she wants to call her boyfriend, and you're taking up the one phone line. So those were the days. So after 10 years, sort of my girlfriend and wife, and in the meantime, we also had three little boys. Decided, okay, so we've been in the U.S. for 10 years. Where do we want to have kids grow up? Where do we want to retire? All these sort of very adult questions, and decided to move back to Europe, actually more for personal reasons. My perspective on myself at that point in time was, hey, here you have this, somewhat successful serial entrepreneur from the West Coast is now going back to Europe, with a couple good exits under her belt, and let's replicate her success there. So I tried to set up 2 companies in the Netherlands, and failed miserably. And then at that point, I started realizing myself that sort of what's my goal, what's my purpose, and is there more in life than making money, and what type of heritage do I want to leave my kids? And if they sort of ask me all these penetrating questions like what do you do, and sort of what's your contribution to society? I was looking for answers myself, and ultimately that brought me into clean tech. And what I decided to do is actually go back to my university in Delft, and they just at that point had launched a sort of a tech incubator program where a lot of students start things out of their studies, and a lot of those things are clean tech or purpose driven. So I took sort of a sabbatical and coached about 200 of these startups.
Wow.
So that's how I got sort of into clean tech. And interestingly, a few of them became quite successful. And then that triggered to me is like, hey, here, I am this sort of experienced entrepreneur. If they can do it, I should be able to do it as well.
Your students must have been so happy with having your experience there. What does circular economy do?
The company then I was CEO of for the last 6 years was actually a company in the circular economy, and that specific company called Black Bear. What they did is they extracted materials out of end-of-life tires, and because there's sort of 2 billion tires that reach end of their life, and 70% of those gets burned. So it's a massive environmental problem, and a big waste stream with not a good solution. So that's sort of one of many circular economy concepts. The basic concept is you take inspiration from nature, and if you look at nature, it doesn't really produce any waste. Everything is used in a productive way. And you're basically trying to replicate that model in the way you organize the economy and maybe even society.
One of my questions would be now is how do we define the circular economy? But what strategies can we use to transition to it?
Yeah, well, so I think you have a very narrow definition of circular economy and a big broader definition. So in the narrow definition it's really about keeping materials in use and make sure you use regenerate natural systems. So in the bit wider definition, you also look at more societal elements. So does it create a fair and just society? So not only staying within the environmental constraints, but also in the social constraints. And there's lots of strategies. So if you use the narrow definition, it's all about, how can you create these cycles? Then if you sort of broaden up a little bit, you can also think about applying strategies as they apply to your business model.
What are the biggest barriers to adopting to the circular economy?
I think I experienced some of those barriers firsthand when I was leading Black Bear. I think the most important one is the current system has gone through quite a few optimization cycles. So the supply chain, everything works in a certain way, and every year the costs have been reduced to a level where they're extremely low. And you're trying to replace that with a new system that's not yet optimized. So just to give you an analogy, if you look at where that actually has happened, like for instance in solar panels or wind, each year solar panel has become like 19%, cheaper or more efficient per kilowatt hour produced year over year over year. So, and if you apply that over 20 years, then you're suddenly I don't know, I won't do the math, but it's like a factor 4 to 6 cheaper. 20% every year shave off. So you have an optimized system that you're comparing with a non-optimized system. So that's one. The second one is that in a linear system where you throw away the waste and there's a lot of pollution, a lot of the costs to society are not priced into the model. So you can actually emit CO2, you can throw away products, but nobody, the world is paying a price, but the person who's doing it is not. So I think what's happening with the clean energy is that they basically have said, we realize that, and then we basically subsidize that or apply a cost to CO2 for the traditional fossil producers. And then the last one I think is just a general. It requires in a lot of cases systems change. So think about petrol-based cars and the whole infrastructure with gas stations and people who do the maintenance, and suddenly you have to replace that with a new system. There's a lot of forces behind who have clear incentives to keep the old system.
Yeah. What would your advice be to the creative industries on helping out with the circular economy?
So Europe has a strong circular economy plan. You see strong adoptions in city level. So Amsterdam has a circular economy plan. You see adoptions in nations, right? So, for instance, we did a big project for Norway where they sort of, made a whole roadmap and where they want to go. But I think for a lot of citizens, it still feels a bit as an abstraction. And if it gets dumbed down, it's often to the level of recycling. So, do you throw away your glass in the right bin? That's your contribution to it. And I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity because I think under the circular economy umbrella, it's such a powerful set of things you can do. And in fact, we only have 10 years left to hit the Paris goals. So we actually launched a report back in January called the Circularity Gap Report. And, as we know, circularity is around 8% of the world is circular. But only doubling that to 16, 70% enables us to meet the Paris goals. Which would be about 40% contribution to the CO2 savings. So yes, sort of solar and wind and geothermal is really key. But electricity is only about 25% of the energy demand, of the CO2 emissions. And without adopting these circular economy strategies, I'm just afraid we won't get there. But in order to be successful, I feel they need to be more embraced by the public.
I think we have to try and normalize it rather than seeing it something as the future.
Yeah.
Through the work we make in films, photography, campaigns, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think we have to make really conscious decisions when we are writing scripts or campaign plans and outings.
Yeah.
And thinking about all the assets, how can we always try and normalize basically the future, what the future should be. In order to live on this planet.
Right.
For us, but also further generations. Making the shift to the circular business is a trending topic at the moment. What can businesses do to discover the opportunity it offers them?
Yeah, so I think what the real opportunity is for businesses, and I think you have sort of seen that accelerating in the last 1 or 2 years, is that the businesses who have been quite aggressive and future-oriented have been getting big rewards from their investors. And there's massive anticipation, and because investors are looking into the future, that the companies who, also help solve these environmental issues and adopt things like circular strategies are much more resilient and will be the companies of the future. So that presents massive opportunities. And you do see that companies are starting to embrace that and then also incorporate that into their business models.
Where can business owners or entrepreneurs go to find out how to calculate their, like, are there any tools within reach for people to find out what their company's footprint is at the moment?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting topic, and I think we're still scratching the surface in terms of circular metrics and how do you measure it. So we have developed this sort of high-level metric for the world, where I said the world is 8% circular, and we now get from a lot of companies basically the question, how circular am I, and could you put like one number on it? And that's sort of a field that's now in early stages of development. So we're actually in the middle of finding, foundations and other, high net worth individuals who are willing to contribute to it. Because we feel if you add our knowledge or on the ground experience and then put it into the digital domain accessible to everybody, that's where you really can have the scalable impact.
Amsterdam aims to be a fully circular city by 2050. What do you envision for circular economy in the coming years?
Well, so I think we're still scratching the surface. So the world is 8% circular, and that needs to double. And in order for that to happen, nations, businesses, and cities all need to adopt circular strategies. And not only adopt, but also implement it. And so we're basically trying to address those three groups in different ways. So if we look at the whole world, we did sort of a scan of the whole world to assess sort of what is the level of circularity, what's the impact of circularity on, or improving circularity on climate change, and then what are the big things you can do in order to get there. As a result, that's sort of a plan for the world. Unfortunately, there's no world government. So what's happening is basically nations are now doing that for each of the countries.
Yeah.
So we have done the Netherlands, we've done Norway, we've done Austria. We're actually now doing work in Canada and in Australia. And, we have a bit less than 200 nations. And some nations are so big, you actually have to look at a bit more. Like, if you do US, you better do California and other states. So we really want to drive that, do as many as we can or partner with other organizations to do that, because I think everybody should have their strategy in place and have their goals. Second one, I think, is cities. By 2030, we expect about 70% of the world population to live in cities. So cities in itself are not necessarily big polluters, but they are big consumption. It's massive consumption, which of course triggers a lot of the pollution elsewhere to supply those cities. So creating, circular cities that are also livable and have, decent jobs attached to them, are much greener, and sort of is a very inspiring concept for a lot of governments. So Amsterdam has done that. Paris is in the process of doing it. London will do it. And, I think that is a very important element you can address. And then lastly, I think we touched about businesses, and our approach is a bit more, I would say, sector-based. So we have basically developed a whole program with the textile industry, with a lot of leading brands, is how can they develop new business models? How can they, take responsibility for their end-of-life textiles? How can they design in such a way that, waste is reusable? So I think that's sort of the angle, and we would like to add, I would love to do much more work in built environment, because that's a big one. I would love to do much more work in the agri-food sector. But, we're a 50-person company, 60-person company out of Amsterdam. So we also have to be realistic. So we try to also partner with other leading organizations.
Yeah. Martijn, I'm going to throw these away.
All right.
And this is the first time I'm doing that, but I think that's...
And how does that make you feel?
Good, because I think speaking to you feels like, for me, speaking to the future. I think this is where we should go to. And I think you've shared a lot of knowledge with us. So thank you very much for your time and sharing that with us, because you really gave me the feeling of a much needed conversation. I think this is where the future will go to. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it inspires others to take big or small action as well.
Thank you. Take care.